and welcome to the Q-Dropped podcast. This is part 2 of our season 1 recap. The first part of that you can hear on any podcast platform, as well as our YouTube. You can actually see the video of us chatting with each other on our YouTube. So the link to that is in the show notes. Part 2, we're going to just carry on where we left off. I am Courtney. I'm the host of the Q-Dropped podcast, and this is my significant other, partner in crime, John.
Hello. Welcome back.
So we're gonna go through each episode that we didn't cover in the first part, and we're just going to tell you what we thought about it and give you any updates we have about the interviewee. Just a reminder that on March 14th, we're going to be posting a Q&A, and that means that you can send in your questions for us or our guests, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. You can send them to qdropped@porthosmedia.net. That address is in the show notes if you need to know how it's spelled. And let's just jump right back into the episode recaps. Episode 9, Jane. Jane is half black and half white, and her white QAnon mom was sending her racist stuff. So it's not something that I can relate to, obviously. But I know how much, or I can imagine, at least start to imagine how much that must really, really hurt. Especially since Jane and her mom had, it seemed like, a pretty close relationship before all of this. Jane decided to remain in touch with her mom despite all of this, despite the stuff that her mom has sent her. And I don't know, the way that she was talking, she basically told us that she would never cut off ties with her mom because that's her mom. And I was pretty impressed with Jane's ability to just set all that aside and just love her mom anyway. What do you think, John? Do you think that's, if somebody was sending you stuff that was like targeting some part of you that you couldn't change and was really offensive because of that, how would you react? Like, would that be a line?
Yes. It would be. It would be a line for sure. Especially with a parent, because again, like we've talked about with some of the other guests, I mean, you have to do what's right for you and your situation. For me, yeah, that would definitely be a line, because you don't owe that person a relationship.
Yeah.
You can choose to cut off ties if you want, or if you want to have some kind of relationship that's, a very surface type relationship, and that's what works for you, then obviously that's what you need to do for yourself, but you don't owe them anything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And
the only thing I would add is the, things can also change, right? How you feel today may not be how you feel a year from now, or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now. So I think, you make a decision for what's best for you today, and that could change.
Yeah, I think that you shouldn't sacrifice your own mental well-being for somebody else. Never. Under any circumstances. I mean, with maybe some exceptions for children, of course, if you're responsible for your children when you bring them into the world. But outside of that, you don't need to sacrifice your own mental well-being for anybody. And if that's what you're doing, if you're finding yourself completely mentally drained and emotionally drained after every time you're around this person or every time you talk to them, I think it's absolutely fair to cut them off. But I think with Jane, Jane in particular would have been probably more hurt by not having a relationship with her mom than to have to continue enduring her mom's crap.
Yeah.
But that's just my guess. That's kind of like what she led on when we were talking. And that is perfectly fine. Like, that's what's right for her. I don't know that I could endure it, though.
Same here.
Episode 10, of course, was Lisa. Lisa in Germany again. Well, no, she was in the Netherlands.
Netherlands.
Which I struggled to say that. I don't know why. I don't say the R. I say the Netherlands. And if you listen to that episode again, I struggle with it in there too.
Well, I didn't even notice.
Netherlands. Lisa, of course, she cut off ties with her best friend, who they were best friends since grade school, and they moved to the Netherlands and hung out, and they had a really, really close relationship. And then her friend just started going down the QAnon rabbit hole, and she was saying stuff like she had to purge herself of her reptilian DNA, and she was taking a far right stance on a lot of things that have to do with German politics. And that is, I imagine, a really challenging thing for Germans to have to deal with, considering where that country has been before. And for a lot of them, it's like a 9/11 or a January 6th for Germany, right? Like, it's like far right politics are a very touchy subject there, and it's something that is often a deal breaker for relationships like Lisa's. If somebody that you cared about was starting to spout off like really far right, racist, homophobic rhetoric, would you cut them off too, like Lisa did?
I mean, in the situation that Lisa was in, yes. I mean, I've never been through something quite that extreme. I mean, I've had friends that have been far more right than me, but I wouldn't necessarily call them right-wing extremists. And, we've had conversations and debates over the years. And I've even had friends that we've talked about, like, conspiracy theories and stuff like that too, which I think we'll probably talk about that a little more in episode 15. But I don't know if I've ever done that, cut somebody out specifically because of that. I've cut people out for other reasons, and maybe some of their views or maybe part of it, but not the whole thing.
Yeah, but I think you're talking about just right. I'm talking about far right. Like, far right is Nazis.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. I mean, I've never been friends with anybody that I would consider a far right extremist.
Yeah, that would be absolutely, like, I struggle enough with. We know people that have conspiracy theory, they follow some of the conspiracy theories, and they're anti-vaxxers and stuff like that. And I mean, we pretty much avoid them because it's in my opinion, life is way too short to be spending extended periods of time with people who just infuriate you and frustrate you, especially when they're not family. It's just, there's no reason to do that. You only have so many days on this earth. Why would you waste any of them hanging out with somebody who's that toxic? So yeah, we avoid people like that. And even though there were people that we've had that were our friends, we used to do things with them all the time socially, and we kind of avoid them now. And that's why. It's because I'm not going to sit in a room and pretend I'm having a good time and ignore the elephant in the room, or, the other possibility is that you get into an argument. That was what I did in my 20s, like.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, the only difference with Lisa's story is that her friend grew into this. They were friends. They had this relationship that was wonderful, and the friend changed. Right. Whereas the people that I've known in my life, they've always been maybe a little more right wing than me. They've always had certain views, and you just kind of learn to tolerate it or whatever. It's not that big of a deal because it doesn't necessarily define who they are.
Yeah.
right? Her situation is very different because her friend changed, and her friend made the decision to go down this path.
Mhm.
So I can understand why Lisa, she completely cut off the friend. I forget now, but
Yeah.
yeah, but I think they had talked here or there or something like that, but they weren't best friends anymore, clearly. So,
Well, she moved away and they hadn't talked
right.
since then. But yeah, I think like there's a big difference though between having friends that have right-wing ideas and having friends who are QAnoners,
Oh,
right? Like
big time.
there's a big difference between that. And for me, I don't have a tolerance for it as well, specifically because of my parents. Like there's a big kind of bruise there, and I'm especially sensitive to, like, when I see anti-vaxxers on Twitter, it gets my blood boiling. When I used to be on Twitter and nothing ever bothered me. I would just log out and go about my day. But now when I see anti-vaxxers, it bothers me. And that's because I have a personal connection to that. And it, like I said, it's a bruise. But with Lisa and her friend, it was a little bit more extreme, I think. And it's more like when you have a friend who's an addict. And which I've had friends who are addicts, and you don't want to be a part of the shenanigans that come along with that. Like a friend of mine who was an addict, she would lie a lot, steal a lot, and she just basically put everybody who loved her through hell and back. And so, like, if you're around her, you're sacrificing your own well-being for somebody who doesn't even care about their own. And, and so I had to tell my friend who is an addict, I said, I'm 1,000% here for you when you want to get better. But until then, I don't want to see you. I don't want to witness this. I don't want to watch you go down this road, this path. But when you're ready to get better, call me. And she did. When she wanted to get better, she called me. But I think that's more what it's like for somebody like Lisa, because you cannot sacrifice your own mental well-being for somebody else who clearly doesn't care about your own well-being. Like, you just can't do that. And you have to put yourself first.
Absolutely.
You just do. And that's ultimately why we avoid some of the people that we know who kind of took a right turn after the pandemic, and it's just too exhausting. Life is too precious. I'd rather watch a movie in my pajamas with my dog and my son and you, of course.
Thanks.
So where are we? Episode 11. Episode 11 was David. Oh my gosh, David.
Yeah.
Another adoptee.
Yes.
We just wanted to bring him home too. He was the Marine, very young. I think he was 23. Did he say he was 23? And he's a Marine, and he's basically decided to cut off communication with his father, who is a QAnon influencer with thousands of followers on like Rumble and whatever the other platforms are. I forget,
whatever
Truth Social or whatever. That is weird, because I mean, you've lived with me for a while now, and I've had a significant following on Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that, and Instagram.
Yep.
What would you do if you found out that the influencer in your life was actually a QAnon influencer?
Wow. Well, I didn't know you were going to go there. I mean, obviously that would be a big problem. I think, I mean, that's much different than David's situation where it's a parent as opposed to a spouse. But yeah, I mean, that would be tricky. That would be tough. I would not. I wouldn't know what to do there.
Yeah.
I'd probably have to seek mental advice.
Yeah, I think that it would be a real challenge. I think the biggest problem with that is that they're contributing to the spread of the misinformation. It's not just that they believe it and are incorporating these crazy ideas into their own world. They're also spreading it to other people. And there was, I think I've told this story on one of our Patreon clips, our bonus clips from one of the episodes, but my mom used to have a natural remedies blog. And it was something that my brother and I set up for her because at the time it was innocent. She was into like oil of oregano and, drinking 8 glasses of water a day and stuff like that, which is not really alternative, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And she would bug us constantly with the latest natural remedies that she'd heard about. And so my brother and I decided to create a blog for her so she could bug other people with it instead of us. And with the blog, we created a Facebook page. And she's long let the blog die long ago, but the Facebook page still exists. And for a while there, I think it was before the pandemic, and then going into the pandemic, she was still posting stuff to it. And a lot of it was like anti-5G, anti-vax stuff. And it was a lot of stuff that just made me concerned about what she was spreading to other people. And because my brother and I had created the Facebook page, we were both still admins on it. And so I decided to go into the admin panel of this Facebook page, and I set it to show in Saudi Arabia only.
Oops.
And suddenly my mom wasn't getting any engagement on her posts, and she couldn't figure out why. But with my apologies to the people of Saudi Arabia, I'm just glad that she's not spreading it anymore. Yeah. She's given up posting on it now because she wasn't getting any engagement. But it was too much for me to cope with, like knowing that I created something that was being used to spread that misinformation. That was way too much for me to deal with.
Yeah. No, I get it. I mean, for me, social media in general has just become, so toxic in, so much of it anyway. I mean, I this, I mean, even a few years ago, I had to pretty much take a break from all social media just because it was affecting me mentally. Like you scroll, you doom scroll and actually what I think messed me up the most was just seeing people that posting misinformation.
Yeah.
Like that in real life spreading anti-vax shit,
Oh.
And I mean that ultimately would drive me insane. I had to shut it all down. I had to shut it all down for a while, and then I gradually started going back on certain things. But honestly, I don't engage really with anyone I know personally in real life through social media anymore.
Yeah.
Like very seldom do I see anything from anyone I know, or definitely not engage.
Yeah.
Because it's just when it's someone and I can imagine this is what it was like for David and his dad too. Like that, what do you do with that? Like that's a real life relationship that you have to see a side of them that's just so toxic.
Yeah.
And that can't just stay isolated. You can't just keep that in social media. Like that moves into your real life. And it's different than when you're just doom scrolling and you see crap. It's easy to just keep scrolling and move past it. But when it's people posting that stuff, like it affects the real life world, the real relationship.
Yeah, I had to stop. So when you have a Facebook page, which I have a couple that I run, when you have a Facebook page, you can use Facebook as the page. So you like as soon as you log in, you can switch into the Facebook page mode, and then you don't see your own personal feed anymore. And so that's what I do now. I cannot handle going on my personal Facebook feed anymore because I'm learning way too much about the people that I know. I
Yeah.
don't like, there's people in this town who like, I'm not best friends with them, but we're not enemies or anything like that. It's just we're cordial. We can be at the same social events and we'll talk and chat and enjoy each other's company. There's a couple of people that we, we'll go to the beach and have a fire with, or, we went to trivia one night at the bar and stuff like that. Office trivia, because we watched that show like 100 times.
Yeah.
And when you start to learn too much about those people, it's like it makes it harder to enjoy their company in real life. And it's not...
You can't unlearn it.
Yeah. And it's like, Facebook has ruined my relationship with a lot of people because I don't want to be around people like that. And if I just didn't know it, like, ignorance is bliss, I guess. But then, on the flip side, it's like, isn't it better to know and know who you're spending your time with?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's up to the individual, right? Just like everybody else in this, it's up to you to decide what's best for you. For me, I had to shut it down.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't log into my personal Facebook anymore, and nobody that I know in real life outside of a couple of friends who are exactly like me follow me on Twitter, and I know that lots of people follow me on Instagram, but I don't ever engage on Instagram. Like, it's to a fault. I don't engage there. So I don't see anybody that I know in real life on any of my social platforms.
Yeah. Same with me. And I prefer it that way. If there's somebody in the real world that I want to talk to, there's many other ways to get a hold of them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And we live in such a small town too, where it's like we run into these people every day. And you go to the grocery store and you see your entire Facebook friends list, in line with you. And it's like, it makes it so complicated and difficult to deal with those situations when that, your neighbor just posted about how Trudeau is drinking the blood of infants. Like, it's just, you can't look at them the same way.
And it's not like they're posting it just to be funny. Like, they're posting it because they actually buy into this crap, right? Yeah. They actually believe it. And there's no getting past that. Yeah.
But it's it's challenging. I just don't my mental health has been way better since I stopped logging into personal Facebook. I can't handle it.
Yeah. The only time I use it is Marketplace. I sometimes have to just pass through to get to Marketplace. And even then, it's like I log in, you just get a glimpse of your timeline and the anxiety just goes up. And it's like, I got to hit Marketplace quick so I can get out of here.
Yeah.
And even just a couple seconds is too much.
Yeah, that's like me. When I log in and have to switch into my page, I'll get like a glimpse of my timeline. And then sometimes I'll like be scrolling it, not realizing that I'm scrolling the timeline for my personal account instead of the one for my page. And then I'll be like, then I'll suddenly see something that just makes me angry. And then, it's just not worth it. So David, we would really love to have David on again to update everybody, because he was really an interesting person to talk to. I mean, they all were, but.
Yeah, no, he had a really interesting story, and just his perspective on things. I just thought it was very unique. Nothing like anybody we had talked to. And
he was such a sweetheart too.
Yeah, he was very well spoken and smart. It's like, for his age, like, just how together he seemed to have his life. Like, wow.
Yeah, he was a cool kid.
Yeah,
I think his girlfriend's a lucky lady.
Yeah,
but she's probably pretty cool too, though. So he's probably lucky as well.
Probably.
That brings us to episode 12, which is the one where Brent Lee lost his father like immediately after he confronted him about his QAnon beliefs, which is pretty wild timing. And it kind of affected the memories that Brentley had of his dad. Because now when he thinks back, he just remembers that conversation about QAnon.
Yeah.
And it's crossed my mind that, like, some people might think that he shouldn't have confronted his father and that nobody should be confronting their QAnon people, because you never know when somebody's going to drop dead, and are you going to regret talking to them about that? And that's the last thing you said to them or something like that. But you can't, in my opinion, you can't run your life based on hypotheticals and based on things that you can't plan. We know that we're all going to die, but you still have to deal with the things that affect you in your day-to-day life. And, you know, in Brentley's case, his mom asked him to intervene, and he really was doing it out of love for his mom and his dad. So it's kind of, the way I see it, his last act of love towards his dad, despite the fact that it tainted his memories of him. Do you think that he did the right thing?
Yeah, I mean, how is he supposed to know that that's going to be the last conversation they have?
Yeah.
You know, does he wish that that wasn't the last conversation? Probably, but I mean, I think that he still did the right thing to confront his father, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that story really broke my heart. Like, when I was writing it, I was like choking up a few times.
Yeah, I mean, I lost a parent when I was 17, and I mean, obviously there was no QAnon back then, and my mother wasn't a QAnoner by any means. But still, like, you still think, like, what would you say if you had that one more conversation, right? Like, what would that be? So I can certainly, you know, empathize that he'd probably want to say something different if he knew it was the last conversation, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. But you can't prepare for that. There's no way. But Brentley, I actually follow him on Twitter, and he is still doing really, really well. And he's running his podcast and YouTube channel. You can find him under the name Unapologetics with an X, where he talks about deconverting from his religion. And also there's a video in there where he talks about his conversation with his dad as well. So definitely check out his stuff.
We used some of his podcast audio, I believe, in our episode with his permission.
Yeah, we did.
Of course. So
he was so nice. He was such a nice person.
He was.
And he actually, nice. we kind of connected through the Left at the Valley podcast when they had me on to interview me. So
right.
Episode 13 was Sam. Sam was our patient saint who, my God, the things that his mother was saying to him and how he was just like a rock, like, just, I still love my mom, I still stand by my mom. And I had such an immense respect for that guy's patience, and I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
You remember, like, the terrible things that his mom said to him. I'm not going to repeat them. And what would you do in that situation if somebody was talking to you like that?
Yeah, you know what? I could probably relate more to Sam personally than a lot of our guests, just because he's very patient and diplomatic, and I think, you know, I'm kind of like that. Like, I tend to not overreact, or at least not act super impulsive. I tend to think about things. I don't always make the right choices, but you know what I mean? So I mean, I kind of get where he was coming from, where he's being patient and he's trying to be understanding. But again, it's like all these other ones, like, where's the line? And for me, I think that the best thing for Sam to do would be to move somewhere else, live somewhere else, at least a different home, if not a different city. But you know, that's not always possible for everybody right then and there. So you have to manage the situation you're in, and it's hard to argue that he's not doing that as well as anybody would.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would definitely try and keep my distance.
Yeah. But do you think that he's like his patience and his willingness to try and understand, do you think that's at the expense of his own well-being?
It sounded like he was trying to take care of his mental health.
Yeah.
In other ways. So, I think that if he's looking after his own mental health and it's not putting him in a dangerous position, then absolutely, I think it's okay for him to be patient and try to listen and understand.
Yeah.
To a point.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that like what we've said repeatedly is that everybody's line is different, and everybody knows when they can no longer handle what's happening. And
yeah.
I think that I really liked Sam again. He was a really interesting person. I think that we'd have fun like having him over for a beer or something like that.
Yeah, I think he would be fun to hang out with. Probably a board gamer. I bet he's a board gamer.
I was just going to say he'd probably kick our ass playing Trivial Pursuit.
yeah, or Catan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that brings us to episode 14, which I would say was the climax of this season. This was the episode that blew all the other episodes out of the water. Like, not to say that everybody else's story wasn't interesting and very informative and something that we all needed to hear, but this one was gutting. And so Kurt is the person who was interviewed on that episode, and he lost his soulmate when they had a really happy relationship. It sounded like a really mutual, respectful, mutually supportive, very loving relationship. And out of nowhere, this woman just snapped on him and accused him of being a demon and said that she was going to have him charged with a crime he didn't commit and sent to prison and ultimately killed in prison, which I just can't even imagine like what that would be like. Like, it's one thing if your significant other is kind of an ass all the time, like is always kind of picking on you and is like just being a horrible person all the time, and you're kind of putting up with this verbal abuse all of the time, and then they say something like that. But it's another thing when it's like a really nice, loving, caring relationship, and both parties are telling each other that they're their soulmate, and then all of a sudden she snaps like this. And the craziest thing about it was that when we interviewed Kurt, we sat down to discuss this with him, obviously, and he was taking us through the course of his relationship, and he starts talking about how she started to like say weird things to do with QAnon and how she started going down this QAnon rabbit hole. And then he started talking about how he was doing research because he wanted to try and understand where she was coming from and stuff like that, essentially approaching it as they had approached their relationship before, mutually respectful, right? And he's telling us all of this, and then he tells us that it like kind of became too much for him and he was getting concerned and stuff like that. And I asked him at one point, we had been talking forever, and at one point I just asked him, and I'm like, and is that why you broke up with her? Because I thought that's what the story was. And I think John did too. And that's when he said to us, he said, I haven't even got to the real story yet. And we're like, what? And he starts going on and on about this day that this woman snapped on him and the worst week of his life. And John and I were literally just sitting there looking at the screen, just jaws agape, like neither of us said a word for 30 minutes.
It was a while.
Yeah, and we were just riveted, and we couldn't believe what we were hearing. But that was a crazy, crazy story. And I wish that you guys could meet Kurt because he was so just seemed so together and so calm, and he had his thoughts organized, and he was so well spoken, and it just made our hearts break even more for him because he seemed like he really loved this woman, and he was really, really broken up about what had happened to her.
Yeah.
And or with her, and it just totally broke our hearts. What was your experience when we went through that interview, John?
I mean, you could really hear and feel the pain
Yeah.
that he was in. Like he had mentioned that, he was, by the time we were talking to him, that he was better. He not fully healed. What did he say? It was like an open wound turned into a scar, I think was the reference that he made. And I could feel that scar for sure from him. Like he was very candid, and you could tell that it was hard. It was hard for him to share that story. And I believe he told us that he'd never, like aside from some close friends, he hadn't really talked about it. Certainly not publicly, like he did with us.
Yeah.
So it was the first time he had ever really done that. So, I mean, thank you, Kurt, for sharing your story with us and everybody. But that was a tough one, and it was hard to edit that one as well, just because again you're listening to these clips over and over and over again, and some of them were quite graphic. That was one that I really had a lot of mental imagery going on in my mind as he's telling the story, and as I'm listening to it over and over again, like I can see them sitting in that living room as she's confronting him about the demons and all that. Like it's like you could see this turned into a movie or something,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was something else, that's for sure. He was such a good interviewee, and I would definitely have him back again for sure in a heartbeat to just talk. Like maybe next recap of season 2 or something, we could have him on, him and Josh maybe. But
yeah,
it was that was a rough one, and it was really hard for me to write. I was continually getting choked up, and I've heard from a lot of people who listened to that one, and several people told me that they had to listen to it in installments because it was so hard to hear. So yeah, that was basically the shining jewel, apparently, of our episodes so far. Everybody's story is important and everybody's story is interesting, but that one just like stuck with us.
That one, I think that one, I don't want to say it took a lot out of me or us, but I think it, because it was a spouse, I think it's just a little different, right?
Yeah. It was
I think
emotionally.
you've alluded. Yeah, you've alluded in the past, with parents, like everyone kind of expects that they're going to lose their parents at some point, not necessarily to QAnon, but in some way. But a spouse, like that's just so hard to relate to.
Yeah, that is like, I can't even imagine you ever going down the QAnon rabbit hole.
Yeah, and you know what when Kurt was telling us about himself when he was younger, and like he talked about how he dabbled in conspiracy theories, and I could relate to that too, because I did too. Like after 9/11 and stuff like that, I remember watching all the 9/11 was an inside job crap and all that, but it was just, I think he said it like for entertainment purposes only. Like there's nothing wrong with getting into a good conspiracy theory for entertainment purposes.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Can be fun. It can be fun to debate and discuss and stuff like that. But as we've started to learn, like doing this podcast, how dangerous it can also be.
Yeah, it really can.
So,
I think even you and I, when we first started dating, we talked about conspiracy theories.
yeah, I mean, we weren't that far removed from 9/11 at that point, and
Yeah.
there was all those. I remember MySpace. Remember MySpace? That's where I find links to all the documentaries out there, footage of, you know, the planes going into the building and all the nonsense theories behind it and all that crap.
Yeah. And like I think that we've said a million times before on the podcast, that it's okay to have a healthy skepticism about what the government is doing and
Absolutely.
if everything that they're doing is in our best interest. But taking it too far, some of these people are just taking it way, way, way too far. And also, like, you have to rely on evidence. You have to, like, you can't believe things unless you have real, verifiable, demonstrable evidence. And,
and a lot of these things, I mean, and we're never going to have all the evidence. We're never going to see all the, we're not going to have the whole picture, right?
But that's why we have to have experts, right? Like, we have people who go through 10 years of school to learn how to research, vaccines, for instance. They do this and then they spend their career researching vaccines. At some point, you have to recognize that this person has an expertise in that field. And we have to start or go back to a point where we trust, at least in part, trust experts again. Because it's just getting out of hand.
I mean, this idea that you, or, you know, not you, but, you know, you out there have the inside information, you know, because you read it somewhere on the internet, on some blog, that's the real information.
Yeah.
As opposed to the experts that actually know what they're talking about. Like, you happen to stumble across the blog with all the secrets exposed.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, we've talked about that a lot, how some of these people just, they have this need to feel special and like they're the one in the know. And you know, on a planet of 9 billion people, and you know, your kids have moved out and you're retired and nobody needs you anymore. It's hard to feel special. So, you know, people kind of, I think, in that situation grab at anything sometimes.
Yeah. But that's what's more shocking about Kurt's story, is that it wasn't, you know, an old retired person with nothing else to do, right? It was someone kind of in the prime of her life and obviously with a need for something.
Yeah.
But
I don't know.
That was that was definitely that was a rough one for sure.
It was heavy. Very, very heavy. That's going to stay with me for a long, long time. But Kurt has stayed in touch. We've emailed back and forth a few times, and he's doing great. He listens to every single episode. He loves our podcast. And last week, when we didn't post an episode, he actually emailed us and said, "Are you guys okay?" Like, this is how sweet of a person he is. So this is why, like, when we're talking to him and he was telling us all this stuff, like, everything just broke our hearts. He's just such a genuinely sweet person. And so shout out to Kurt. Thank you for being on our podcast. And we hope maybe you'll come on again for like updates or maybe the season 2 recap. Yeah. And we hope you're doing well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I hope he's happy and taking care of himself for sure.
Mm-hmm. So finally, we have Sarah, episode 15. Sarah was a lot of fun to talk to. Sarah was a very, very bubbly person, a very fun person to talk to. There was a lot of laughing during our interview. I have a feeling that Sarah deals with this QAnon stuff in her life with humor. But her story was, of course, her mom went down the QAnon rabbit hole and they were previously very, very close. And she basically pulled away and hasn't been talking to her mom near as much after her mom sent her some transphobic text messages about a friend of hers who has a transgender child. And Sarah's story struck me when we were talking to her how similar it was to mine. It was almost exactly the same. Like, it was uncanny. It was the yearly trips to Disneyland, the hippie parents, the parents who love to have a party, and just making everything magical, even though we didn't have any money. And just, it was so much like mine. It was just wild. So I really connected with Sarah, I think, the most out of all of our guests. But the thing that stuck out about Sarah's, and another reason why it was very much like mine, was the guilt that she expressed. Like, we didn't put a lot, like, there was a lot of it that ended up on the cutting room floor, but she expressed an immense amount of guilt for not talking to her mom as much as she thought she should, for not visiting her mom as much as she thought she should. She felt very, very guilty for that. And that's something that I struggle with a great deal, because I am very kind of chilly towards my parents now. They come over every once in a while, but we'll talk about surface things and then they leave. Our relationship is very, very different from the way that it used to be. We used to hang out a lot. We used to talk a lot. They used to fill us in on the town gossip because that's what they do. And we used to really enjoy their company. Probably me more than John, but I really enjoyed their company, and I considered them friends. And when all of this happened, I couldn't see them the same way. It changed the way I see them. And now it's not as important to me to spend as much time with them as possible. It's more important to me to spend time with John and with my son and with my daughter. And I feel guilty about that. I struggle with a lot of guilt about, they must feel really lonely and they must hate that this is happening. And I think about that a lot and I feel really, really guilty about that. But I'm not just looking out for my own mental health. I'm also protecting my family by keeping at least a little bit of a distance. And Sarah's guilt was something that I really recognized and really could empathize with. Even though, like, I know, 'cause I feel the same guilt, but I could recognize in her that she didn't, like, she was being too hard on herself, essentially. It's hard for me to say that about myself, that I'm being too hard on myself. But what do you think about that, John? Do you think that she should feel guilty about putting some distance between her and her mom?
I don't think she should feel guilty, but I can totally understand why she would.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just similar to your situation for sure, kind of along the same lines. And, and I mean, I kind of mirror what you do with your parents. So, I mean, I feel kind of how you feel. So I get that she would feel guilty and not want to spend so much time around her mom. But again, like you said, there's other factors like kids. You have if the kids have a relationship, you don't want to necessarily stand in the way of that while at the same time protecting them.
Yeah. Yeah. Our son obviously has the really good relationship with my parents, and we live in this small town together. So we're going to see them whether we want to or not. So we kind of don't have a choice to keep them in our lives. But again, they have been told where the boundary is, and they, for the most part, respect that. So that's also why we still have them in our life. I think if they continually cross that boundary, it would become intolerable, and we would have to change things.
But and just going back to, Brentley, you don't know when you're going to lose your parents, right? And even if your relationship is different now than it was when you considered them really good friends, they're not going to be around forever. And you have to decide what's more important. Do you want to have some kind of relationship with them or no relationship with them? Like, I can't make that decision for anybody. Everyone has to decide for themselves. But, I know having lost a parent, like, I don't have an option of having a relationship with my mom. So I can understand when somebody kind of says, like, why would you ever cut your parent off? Like, I can kind of see that, because a lot of people don't have the option. And so that's probably where some of the guilt comes in, where, are you being selfish by pushing them away when there's other people that don't have the option? I get it, but it's not that simple, right?
No.
There's so much more to it, because your mental health is just as important.
Yeah, there was that period of time right after my brother and I figured out that they were down the QAnon rabbit hole, and we were arguing with them back and forth in email. And that was like, I wasn't able to focus on work. I wasn't able to, like, I was angry all the time. I think I remember yelling in our bedroom about how much I dislike white people. I can't remember what triggered that, but it was something to do with like the racism related to QAnon. And it's not, I don't dislike white people. I was just very frustrated. Obviously, my husband is a white person and I love him very much. But it was very disruptive to our life.
Yeah.
And we couldn't have gone on like that. We just could not have. Everything would have fallen apart. I would have stopped making money. We wouldn't have been able to pay our bills. Our relationship with our children would have suffered. We could not have gone on like that. And so at some point in situations like that, you have to make the choice. What is more important? Do you cut them out so that you can go back to paying the bills, taking care of your kids, and being a mom to them, and a wife to you, and a dog mom to Lucy? Or do you keep them in your life and try to endure it and try to hang on to the pieces as they crumble around you? You have there is a point where you have to draw the line and cut it off.
And it's been mentioned by several of our guests too. It's like your parents are gone. It's like the person that is no longer there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like you've lost them, like they're gone, but they physically still exist. You can physically still see them and talk to them and be around them, but the person is gone.
Yeah.
I forget who it was that said it, but someone said that, they were already mourning the loss of their loved one. It might have been Hale. That line really stuck with me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everybody who we've interviewed has said that in some form or another too. But yeah, that was another impactful episode, and Sarah was an absolute delight to talk to. She seems like somebody I could totally be friends with in real life. Like, I felt like I could just talk to her forever, and it would have been fun to just sit and talk to her about like non-QAnon things,
Yeah, it's funny. You get for me, and I'm sure for you, like when you're listening back and writing the episode, and then when I'm going through all the audio and cutting it up and putting little clips, you start to feel like the person more than you actually do. And it's just, you definitely develop a bit of a one-way bond with them, I guess. Like, we did interview them and talk to them, but I've spent a lot more time working on their interviews than they've spent with us. So it's a weird feeling. It's a weird dynamic.
Yeah, it really is. But they've all been, every single one of them has been just so great to connect with and to hear their stories, because this has been really therapeutic for me. It's helped me to cope with a lot of the stuff. And you'll be happy to know that things have kind of improved with my parents over the course of this podcast. But if you have more questions about things to do with my parents, you can send it in for the Q&A. The email is in the show notes. But that's it. That's the end of the episodes. We've recapped them all and given our thoughts on them. Anything else you want to add to that, John?
No, not really. Yeah, I mean, I know that when we went into this, I remember us talking about how hard it would be on us mentally just doing this. And I know that it's been hard on you at times writing them, and I know that it's been a challenge for me at times. So there's been a couple episodes in particular that it's just been really hard to get through them.
Yeah.
But so a lot of the comments that we've got from people just saying that, like, a reoccurring comment is like, this podcast is so needed. Thank you for doing this. This is something out there that's required, and hearing stuff like that makes me feel like, it's worth going through this to get it out there. If it can help people, even just help people relieve some of the pain that they're going through, knowing that there's stories like this out there that they can relate to. It's been a lot of work. It's been hard work, but it's been rewarding in that way. Yeah,
agreed. It is a lot of work, but it's work that I enjoy for the most part. Like, even when we're dealing with a really heavy episode, there's a level of enjoyment knowing that we're getting the story out there and that people will connect with it. And it's like a big, giant support group.
Yeah, we've even talked about that just in just casually. Like, wouldn't it be weird to like have all the guests together in a room, like, and like, not that would be possible, but how surreal that would be. Like, it would just be a big therapy session.
Yeah, essentially. Or you know what? We might just end up talking about things that have nothing to do with this, just because we're so tired of it.
Probably, yeah. We'd end up talking about sports and
the weather.
Josh. I'm pretty sure Josh would just be talking politics.
Yeah, he's fun. He was fun to have on. Like, wow, that guy. He's the one that I think should have his own podcast. He was so well spoken. And he just could articulate his thoughts so well. But yeah, that's the end of our recap. So season 2 will start on March 21st. And we're going to have an episode featuring 2 brothers whose father ran for office in Colorado. It's going to be very, very interesting. You're going to want to tune in. And we're going to have some more crazy, interesting guests coming up. So make sure that you're subscribed on your favorite podcast platform to get notified when that happens. And just a reminder that next week we're going to be posting a Q&A. So if you have any questions for us or for our guests who have been on the podcast, send an email to qdropped@porthosmedia.net. That email address is also in the show notes if you need to figure out the spelling. And send us your questions, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. That's going to be another fun one. It'll be me and John in that one again. So you have to see us again. And a reminder that you can see video of this episode on our YouTube channel. Link is in the show notes. And you can get an ad-free version of this episode if you sign up to be a patron on our Patreon. And you'll also get bonus clips and ad-free versions of all of our other episodes. Thank you to our existing Patreon supporters. We honestly could not do this show without you. And thank you to everyone who has listened and supported this podcast in many other ways. We are thrilled at how well it's done, and we can't thank you guys enough for doing that for us.
Yeah, thank you very much to the Patreon supporters, especially but everybody that's supported, it's been amazing. The sport's been great.
Yeah.
I think it's really exceeded our expectations when we started this out.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you for listening.